Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Welcome to the last day of Build. Thank you for coming out on Friday. In this session, we're going to talk about how you can rapidly detect outages in your applications with Application Insight. This last session of 4 sessions that we had at Build, where Application Insights really helps you make sure your applications are available, performing, and succeeding. So as we get started, my name's Vlad Jovanovic. If you weren't at my session yesterday, I've been at Microsoft for just under 15 years, started in Windows on technology called WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation. Spent a lot of time in the System Center and the monitoring space, always really on the monitoring and management of distributed end-to-end systems. Focused on working a lot with our partners, building management packs from all the way to the hardware layer, all the way into the application stack. And just recently moved into this Application Insight service that's really focused on the custom .NET applications. And it's probably one of the funnest points in this 15-year career at Microsoft. And we're really excited here to be at Build telling you about how you can use Application Insights for both your devices, for apps that run on devices, or your services. So we're going to talk here around just quickly what is Application Insights. How many people is this the first Application Insight session for them? Well, there's quite a few people for being the first. So I'll spend just a few slides, 2 slides on just sort of what Application Insights is, what it isn't, so to sort of ground you, and then we'll sort of quickly dive down into what we're going to cover in this session today, and then you can sort of figure out what you want to follow up on in some of the other sessions. So in this session, we're going to talk about how to make sure your Application Insights your apps are available. We're going to talk about availability tests, how to do HTTP pings against your websites, how to run these Visual Studio web tests, and then we'll talk about alerts and dashboards. So Application Insights is delivered as a service. It's part of Visual Studio Online, so if you have a Visual Studio Online account where you're doing team projects, builds, load tests, you use Application Insights from there. You don't have to have your team project in a Visual Studio Online account to use the Application Insight feature set. You can still be using on-prem or some other tool. It is also, you saw it yesterday in Scott's keynote and Bill Staples' session, there's also a portion of Application Insights that's part of the Azure Portal preview around the website resource today, where you can do endpoint tests and you can do usage directly right in that portal. So that's all sort of delivered by this App Insights service. We have a Visual Studio integration that makes it very, very easy to get started. So if you click File New Project for web, phone, or store project types, or if you have an existing project type of those types, you can very, very quickly add Application Insights to your project that adds all the right NuGet packages, all the right configuration, so that when you deploy to some running instance, it's very easy to have all the telemetry wired up. In the server side, you just have to install an agent, and all the information flows to the App Insight service. And really, we help you do 3 things. The first is how do you make sure your apps are available? Right? If your customers can't get to them, if they're not available to them, you can't perform what you want to do on your business. So that's the first part of Application Insights, is how do you just make sure that your apps are available, they're up, and they're running? The second part is, if they're up and running and they're available, how do you ensure that they're actually performing to what your users expect? Are they able to complete their transactions, or are they so long, or delaying through different sections that they're going to some of your competitors to complete the transaction that they wanted to complete? After you've solved your performance problems, so you've got an available app, you've got it performing to what you want, but are you actually succeeding? How do you know? How do you know if your app is performing and you're easy enough for your users to do what they came to do on your site? Are they struggling? Are they abandoning carts? Are they doing things that you wish they wouldn't do? Are they finding your new features? How do you really understand if your application is succeeding and you're not wasting your own time, and you're helping, hopefully, your business move forward, as every company is focused on great end-to-end applications and great end-to-end experiences for your customers. So this slide here if you think about sort of the picture on the boxes on the left, if you think about your service that is exposed through a browser, there's different rows that we'll talk about. In the top column, the focus of this session, and the columns in this table, I tried to specify sort of what you need to do to get configured to use Application Insight for that service, and then sort of what does that result in? What would that configuration exist in? So in the top row, you want to ensure your app is available, and you want to create these availability tests from locations around the world or different geographic locations where your site may be available from. And that results in essentially a stream of metrics that we have at a location level, we have aggregated at a sort of a test level, and we have aggregated sort of across a app or a component level. And which clearly, once you have those metrics, you can do all sorts of things with those metrics. You can graph them, you can create rules over them, you can send alerts through emails over them, and those are the type of things we'll talk about. In the second sort of two sections, from the browser side, how do you easily get telemetry from the browser side, from when users are doing things through a browser? How does that data flow back into App Insights? How does it help you understand what your customers are doing, not doing? That was really the focus. That middle row was really the focus of our first session on Wednesday. And then the last row was the focus of our session yesterday on performing. Really, how does this agent that gets installed on the server do the right collect the right counters, automatically help you understand if the problem in performance is your code, your dependencies, or something on the fabric that your code is actually running on. So let's get started into really the available part of this session. So there's really two types of tests that you can do in Application Insights today. You can do a very simple URL ping where you just enter in a URL, you choose a few locations, you configure some settings, and that's it. We'll ping that particular URL at a certain interval, and we'll let you know when that fails, and we'll get into a demo really quickly to show you how that works. The other option is this Visual Studio web test, where if you were at Chuck's session, how many just attended Chuck's session? Just downstairs, just a few. So I'll show you some of those. There is a way to create a test that with Visual Studio Ultimate, you can record a number of transactions through a site. You go to your home page, you go to a particular app, you go to a particular thing, you click checkout, and you want to have that end-to-end scenario as a test. Maybe you're using that already for doing load tests or doing some scenario tests or some regular check-in tests. You can have those tests reused as part of your application availability suite so that we're running those tests automatically for you. So some really common questions is, I've got an internet site, just available behind a firewall, not available publicly. How do I get availability monitoring? We talked about being able to monitor some of those sites as long as those sites or those servers could get out to the internet through performance monitoring. Right now, there is no way to ping into those sites. We can't use it. You can't use it for availability monitoring. And also, if you have custom extensions in Visual Studio, those also don't run. So let's switch to a demo and show you getting started and spend most of the time in the demo. So here I've got a brand new account I just created. Here's my new live ID. I created a brand new Visual Studio Online account. How many people don't have a Visual Studio Online account? Just a few of you. So if you don't have a Visual Studio Online account, this is what you'll see. If you already have a Visual Studio Online account and you've already used App Insight, you probably will never see this. You'll probably already have a project and already see data. But this is what the initial screen looks like. And if I click Try Application Insights, there's a getting started experience here that we tried to make really, really easy to get started, where I don't have any applications monitored. This is the first thing I'm doing with Application Insights. I have an app. I have a particular URL that I want to ping. And here, all I have to do is name the app. So I'm going to call it my Friday demo. And the app that I want to test is this new Fabricam app that I've got deployed. That's the URL. And I'm going to send notifications to this particular address if something fails. And that's it. That's all I need to get started. I didn't have to obviously change my application. I didn't have to do really anything from code. It's an existing site that's already there, that's already executing, and this availability data will start to be configured and start to come in. So that's sort of the bare bones, getting started, no usage side. I didn't start from Visual Studio. I started directly in this portal. So if you don't have access, you're not doing a deployment of the app, but you just want to get some availability for it, this is the place to start. Now, let me show you something that already exists while that's spinning up, and we'll come back to that in a second. This is an app that is already actually monitoring that site, and it's been monitoring that site for a little while. In this case, I already have a few things added to that site. I've already have the agent added to this site and a bunch of other things, and I've created a dashboard for that site so I can look at all of the different metrics that come in for that particular, from either the agent for those different streams that we talked about on that first slide. So in this case, if I drill into availability for this particular app, you'll essentially see what this data set looks like. In this view, I'm looking at the last 24 hours of data. That's the default, and I can change this to a few different custom time ranges: 7 days, last 3 days, 48 hours. We're also working on sort of smaller intervals so that you can get to even tinier times. Now, you can see I'm already selected into a particular view down here, but I have this brush down here that I could very quickly sort of highlight into different sections, and I can see what my overall response time is for all of my tests. And I can also look at what the overall availability is across all tests. Now, in this case, I only have one test, so we're not doing much aggregation across all tests. And if I drill onto a particular test, you can see which locations this test is running in. This is almost the plain vanilla test that we created on that first view in that other completely separate account. The only thing I did here is that I added a few more locations for this test to execute from. And I can see that I have a failure here, so I can sort of hover over that failure, drill into that failure, sort of expand back and look at all of these pieces. Now, before I start drilling into these, let's look at some of the configuration options now from this experience, outside of sort of what we call the getting started experience. So if I click on this plus sign where I want to create a test, there's two options: a single URL test and a multi-step web test. Let's look at the single URL first. This is essentially the one that was configured for us in that wizard. I can name the test, so I'll say new test. I specify the URL for the test. I don't have a web test to upload, so I'm just going to specify the URL. I can choose a number of locations. I have an option how often to run the test. So maybe if the test is expensive, I don't want it running every 5 minutes hitting my site, I can run it every 10 minutes. You can also choose these are every 5 minutes or 10 minutes from all 16 locations that will be pinging your test. And it doesn't run the JavaScript, as Chuck talked in the earlier session on load test, that it's really sort of performing these actions sort of on the wire, so it's not running JavaScript. You won't see sort of usage numbers increase as you would if you were actually on that site. Now, I also have a few capabilities here where I could look for a particular status code if I want to see what the status of the page is. And I can also do some sort of content match where I can do a contain string. So if I go to my login page, I expect to see the word login come back. And if it doesn't come back as login, then that overall test would fail. And that overall test period would sort of get aggregated over all of the attempted tests, and the sort of successful tests over all tests is how we calculate availability. The alert feature here allows me to specify how many locations need to fail. So if my test is running in 16 locations, maybe there are some problems with downloading some of the dependencies, and if it fails from one location, it's typically just an internet problem and not really a problem with my app. I don't really care about sort of that internet noise. But if maybe 3 or 4 locations fail, that probably means I have a problem. So you have the ability here of choosing how many locations need to fail, and sort of what is the aggregation period that we're looking for those number of failures. So in this case, if I choose, it's a clicking exercise here to choose all 16. So if I choose, I want 5 locations to fail in the past 10 minutes, and I'm going to email Chuck because he emailed me in my in his session today. We'll send all the emails to Chuck. And I forgot to show you one thing here. If I go back to edit test, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But there's a copy to clipboard button here, where all of this configuration, this web test, this alert configuration, is essentially stored in Application Insights, and it's stored in this configuration file. If I click copy to clipboard here, and I give it access, and then just put that in Notepad, you'll see that it gives me the XML for a rule ID. This is the rule ID that is part of the schema for what that rule looks like in this configuration file. And you can create these particular rules either directly and then upload them and overwrite all the configuration that you made in the portal. You also have the ability to download this configuration file, and I'll show you these in a little bit as we get to some of the more complicated tests. So that test already started executing. You can sort of see the couple green dots just over on the right. It got distributed to all those locations. It starts executing that test, and it starts sending you that data. So in this case, we see that the different response times for these different intervals are 100% because all of the attempted tests over all of the successful tests over the total tests is equal. So it's, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 they've executed over 5 attempted, so we're at 100%. As soon as tests start failing over a particular interval, we'll start showing you your availability going down. So a really powerful feature to help you understand if your app is available. And really your goal, as you're building apps, as we're building an app, we really want to know about the problem before our customers do. Right? That's sort of our goal, and we track really closely how often do we find out about a problem by our customers. And every single time we find out about a problem from our customers and not our monitoring solution, we go back and we figure out how do we create a test that would have found that particular issue, right? So it's a circular process as you build new features, build new things that customers do, you've got to add new tests to test those particular aspects. As you build different stamps, as you have different sort of failure conditions, how do you sort of have tests that test end-to-end to make sure that your customers are successful from sort of the beginning of your pipeline all the way to the end? But also, how do you then, those are great tests to have because it'll tell you your site's down, but then it's really useful to have sort of more component-based tests because you probably have complex applications, and it's then good to help have component tests to understand which component's down so that you can start doing that more detailed analysis of actually resolving the problem after you've detecting it. But the first job to be able to solve the problem is to actually know you have a problem. And that's really what these web tests are sort of meant to help you enable and meant to help you give you that alert in your pocket, your phone buzzing. Right now it's just email notifications. There's no SMS. There's no other aspects. Definitely in the future, as we think about these scenarios, we definitely see the ability to send SMSs, the ability to expose these alerts through APIs so that you can expose them and grab them into your ticketing tools and send them through all the other ways that you may get alerted and notified today to find out who's on call, who's not on call, does it need to be escalated, does it not be escalated. All those sort of things are things that we definitely see. Few other things on this UI. I have the ability to pause and resume these tests. So if you are doing a deployment and you know that these particular components are going to get down, maybe you have a maintenance sort of mode or window for your site, you could pause these tests so that when you come back, you don't see your availability down in the toilet, and you don't get a bunch of emails, and you don't have to go and clean up the emails. We will give you both an email when an alert happens, when it gets activated, and we'll tell you when that condition is cleared. So we'll sort of send you both emails for a particular issue. So now let's look at the other one that we didn't look at. We had a single URL, but now let's look at the multi-step web test. Multi-step web test is essentially the same. Really two big differences. Instead of the URL to test, I have the file to upload. And this is the web test file that you create in Visual Studio Ultimate that Chuck showed just in the session before, where you can have a recording, you can specify different URLs to hit. Then it gets saved, you can parameterize it, you could sort of have all the right auth settings within there, so that all you have to do is upload it here and execute it. Now, you notice it doesn't have to the two fields that says what's the HTTP status code and what is the contain string. That's because all of that logic is really embedded now in the test, and you can do lots of really, really complicated, rich logic in these tests. And some of our tests, we've been very successful, just like any Microsoft product before. Now any Microsoft service needs to dog food their own service, so we're using application insights to monitor application insights. We have a different environment that we're using so that it's not too recursive. And we have a bunch of tests running in sort of our pre-production environment that are testing things against our production environment. So they're literally logging in to a production account that has a well-known data set in there. It's clearly monitoring some apps, and it's clearly having some failures, and it has performance events and memory events and exception events. And as this test logs in, tests the whole login sequence, obviously make sure that all of our dependencies into auth work, all of our dependencies into TFS online work, and then we drill into the pages, and we actually check to make sure the data is flowing, data is available, and if data is not available, those tests fail, and you have all of that rich capability in these tests to define what it is that you're looking for. And sometimes there are times when the password changes. And now all of a sudden these tests all start failing and everyone starts getting really worried, and it's luckily turned out not to be a big issue. It's just a test failure. And these are things where we really believe long term that these tests really need to be part of your app. And the reason Application Insights is so tightly aligned with Visual Studio and Visual Studio Online is that the creation of these tests, anytime you change code, anytime you do a deployment, anytime you add a feature, these tests that should be executed should just be part of that. Right? If I remove a page and there was a test that was testing that page, there should be automatic logic telling you that, hey, you just removed a page, that there's a test there. This test is going to fail. And we should have logic available there. And even better, since we have all of the telemetry understanding what your customers are doing against your site, why the heck don't we just create a bunch of tests for the common flows that your users are doing? And how can we just make it part of the application deployment cycle so that when you deploy your app, you don't have to go and pause a bunch of tests and then upload new tests at the same time that you're deploying an app because your tests all changed? How do we make that all part of one application deployment experience? And this is where you'll see us invest much more into sort of making this monitoring sort of configuration and settings really part of code that can be versioned into different environments, that can be templatized, that can be overridden, that can be customized the way you need. But how do you just make it part of your application deployment lifecycle so that when you're in your performance test environment, you're clearly going to run a much different, more rigorous set of performance tests. You're going to load them like Chuck showed earlier. That's really the vision of how do we help really make sure your apps are available, but also available in this application lifecycle. Because the longer you let these tests fail because of the test problem, the more you're not going to really trust the actual data, and it'll be sort of a never cry wolf scenario where it keeps crying wolf, you keep saying there's a problem, keep saying there's a problem. It's hard to actually find out when there actually is the problem on your site, and it wasn't the test that failed, it was actually your site that failed or your dependency failed, because right, it's never your code. So this is where you do Visual Studio web tests, and I actually have a web test here that I created, and as Chuck showed in the previous session, you could go File, New Project. Under Test, under Visual C# here, I have this Web Performance and Load Test project. That's the project template that you want to create. I've already created one of these here, and I've done a recording that goes against a few different pages. And if I click Run Test here, I can run this test locally, and it does a bunch of these different transactions, and I can see all of the resulting data here, the data that came back in the web browser, what the request is, what the response is, what the context is. And now I'm going to upload this into this page. So we'll say New Multi-Step Web Test, and I'll say New Friday Web Test. Click Browse. Oh, I always forget where I put these. There it is, Web Test 1, Visual Studio Web Test file. Click Open there. Choose a number of locations. Again, wherever you want these texts executing from. And I'm not going to do any alert settings on this one. And that's it. Now this test is uploaded. Now there are some cases where if this test is doing a loop, we don't let these tests run forever. Clearly, these locations where we're executing these tests are a multi-tenant service where all of our different customers are executing and running these tests. These aren't like the performance load test that Chuck talked about where we spin up an instance that's dedicated for you and we run your tests. These are really on a shared set of infrastructure where we have sort of a pool of capacity in these different locations based on where the locations are most popular and how do we run these tests. So we give your test 2 minutes before we kill it. So if your test takes a long time, if it's going to be a really long-running test, that's not the type of test that you want to upload into availability, application insights for your available scenarios. You want to do sort of shorter tests that are finished within that 2-minute window. Otherwise, you'll see your test failing, and when the test sort of times out, it does get reported as a failure. So you'll see your availability come down, even though your site may be available, but just slower than the 2 minutes. Okay, so another thing I wanted to show is sort of on the Azure side. So on the Azure side, from I think it was around February last year, for 4 types of resources, mobile sites, websites, cloud services, and virtual machines, there's been this capability called endpoint status monitoring, where you could create up to 2 tests from 3 locations, and you could see that resulting data right here in your Azure portal. This behind the scenes actually uses the exact same locations, the exact same detail, and it was sort of really built to be just integrated as a part of Azure. So if you create one of those resources, one of those compute resources I mentioned, you just natively can see that data set, can view that data set without having any other accounts, with any other details. That's what we've had for just over a year, and I don't know, is anybody using that feature today? Few people are using that feature today. So if you're using that feature for an Azure website, because Azure websites now show up in the preview portal, hopefully you saw those tests migrated and available now in this preview portal as associated to your website. If you've created those tests on the 3 other resources that aren't in the new preview portal yet, mobile sites, cloud services, web, virtual machines, you'll see those migrated later as those resources appear in this preview portal. So this is sort of the view. We have these 2 tests. We have the ability to sort of look at what the test result time is. But the data that we had was relatively limited. It really gave me sort of just a simple status text on what the test was, what the response time was. I could graph these, but it didn't show me the Visual Studio result file if a problem happened on the site. It just sort of told me what the HTTP status code was or wasn't available. Now, in the new preview portal, if I browse to a website, and I choose one of my websites here that I've created, it's completely instrumented, sending analytic data to the Azure portal here. It's just not very busy. Let me maybe hit it a few times. It's a really complicated site. So here you can see I have 2 tests that I've created. Those are the same 2 tests that we saw in the other portal. I was actually showing them for a different site in there. And if I drill into this, It's the same data set that you saw in Visual Studio Online that was just showing what your overall availability is. In this case, it's the overall availability across these two tests. I see the login time, the login test. I see the sort of overall end-to-end build test. Right now, it is just allowing me to do single URL tests in this portal. We are working on a feature to allow Visual Studio Web Tests to be uploaded right here into this portal, so that you could see these here, and you have that capability. If I scroll down a little further here, you can see these different tests, and if I select a test, I'll get the same sort of scatter chart or a similar experience that we show in Visual Studio Online. So this is really where we'll be investing a lot more and more of our effort as we really give you a great integrated experience for these Azure resources. I do have a failure on this particular login test, or I should, within the last few minutes. And in this case, I just stopped the site. And if you look at this test, this login test, Antares, when you stop, or Azure, Windows Azure websites, when you stop the website, all the traffic gets redirected to essentially a site unavailable page. But that site unavailable page returns an HTTP 200. So in this case, I edited the test to run from a location, but also to do a content match. So on my login test, I look for the text login to come back, and my test will fail if login doesn't come back, which this redirect shows. So if I click on one of these failures, just as we were able to do in Visual Studio Online, I have the ability to open up the web test right here, which we didn't have the capability of doing in the current Azure portal. This is just a portal preview feature. And if I open up this test, excuse me, and open this up in Visual Studio here, I have all the results of the test. So here you see I did try to hit my site, this build 2014 vj.azurewebsites.net/account/login. I can see what the request looks like. I can see that I got a 302 redirect. Right now, that default web test that gets created when you create a single URL test automatically follows redirects. So we follow the redirect, and my content match, though, fails because I'm doing a required text match for the keyword login just by that content match field, and it failed. It didn't find the word login on a page that was unavailable in their unavailable page. So that test failed, and if I go back to the Azure portal, you'll see the sort of little red dots that show fail. We also have the capability of disabling and enabling these different tests. So we think this is a really, really great integrated feature that hopefully just if you're using Windows Azure websites, you can just use natively as part of this experience. Now, I think two or three other things to note. They are just available on Windows Azure websites that are basic or standard, not available on free or shared. So if you see you have a free or shared website, web tests won't be available, but these analytic features are available. Those can be used on any website. You can see this one's basic, this was standard. I have these capabilities here. So that's what we're doing on the Azure portal preview. Now, let me just switch back to slides, and we'll talk about a few more things. Okay, so we talked a little bit about sort of reusing web tests. So the sort of way that you really want to think about if you're creating these tests that are executing regularly already for performance scale tests, could be really easy to reuse those. Some of the authentication stuff, we did notice that a lot of sites have there's particular passwords. There's sometimes certificates that need to be used to log into a site. We have noticed that teams often don't want these certificates to sort of exist within these web tests because they do get loaded and run and executing on our different nodes. So that's something that you may need to work with your security team on. We do see longer term the ability that you have to have the capability of running these tests, whether they're more coded tests or whether they're coded UI tests, not web tests, so that you could run them on your hardware, on sort of your instance, and then sort of upload the resulting data to our service so that you could test maybe an intranet site from a server that could communicate the results back into the Application Insights portal. That's one of the things that we're definitely interested in thinking about. So let me switch back. Actually, let's go here. So on the web test side, we talked about the alerts that get created, the rule that gets created. Let's take a look at some of the other rules you can create over other metrics, something that we didn't get the chance to cover yesterday. And then we'll also sort of cover some of the ways that you can really put all of this data together. Now that we've talked about the usage scenarios and sort of what your customers are doing. We've talked about performance scenarios. We've talked about available scenarios. How do we put it all together in a dashboard to really capture those key metrics so you have them available for your teams either at the end-to-end view or at a particular component view? Okay, so this is a dashboard that's a dashboard template that is very easy to create, and I'm going to create a new one here. We're going to call it our Friday demo dashboard. There's a few different templates that we support. We support just a blank dashboard, give you a canvas with nothing on there. We have sort of a default application dashboard that shows a number of different tiles that are common for metrics that are exposed for an app. There's a default developer instrumented dashboard. These are the ones that automatically get created when you created the app. Remember when I created the app in the other separate account, it gave me sort of this default dashboard. And then there's an agent instrumented dashboard. I'm going to collect that one, create that one, where I get to choose the app to target. This is the app that all the data is associated to. We use this particular app name when that agent communicates. That gets set in this Application Insights config file. And every app has essentially this component ID that gets used in the different client usage scenarios. So when that JavaScript runs on the browser, it specifies a particular ID that maps to that application ID. And I'll show you where you get your keys and a few things here. So in this case, this dashboard has already been sort of configured to show me my active alerts, my different config changes, exceptions, performance events, memory events. All of these are clickable and will land you into the right place to give you context into that view. So if I do select the availability, I'm in edit mode, and I'll go back into edit mode in a second. If I do drill into availability, it take me to the availability page that we're already familiar with, where I can start sort of looking at data. Now check this out. Over here, we do show you the configuration changes that existed for an app. So if you're studying this particular chart, and all of a sudden you see that availability just started tanking, and clearly the first thing that typically people ask is, what's changed? Either the app changed or the monitoring changes. We have these context little bubbles, green for a configuration change and blue for an application change, to essentially give you that context at your fingertips. And for the application deployment changes, you need to have a build info file that's created through a few build steps, either with TFS Online or hosted build if you're using TFS on-prem. Where we'll work in the future to have an API that you can call to tell us about a deployment, but that's not right now exposed. But this is the type of detail we want to give. So in this case, all of the tests that we created were visible here because we created them against this particular site. Now, before we jump back into dashboards, let's just take a quick peek at some of these configuration files and some of this configuration history that we talked about before. So the first thing to notice is that these keys, or these keys that map to apps, on this admin setting file, this is where you'll find all of these keys and all of these other details. So this is where I have all the links to the different agents. I have An account ID, this really maps to my Visual Studio online account, so vladj.visualstudio.com maps to that one. I have a primary key and a secondary key, and I'll regenerate these if someone who does happen to copy them down quickly and start sending data into my accounts. That will definitely be funny, and it'll be funny for everybody who's watching the recording because they can probably copy it a little quicker than maybe you can. There are also the Java agent, the different scripts that you need to do to configure the Java agent, the JavaScript usage script that would get added, and here you can see that particular key that will map everything to the particular app that I've selected. And same with the different settings and the keys for these different SDKs. A lot of these keys will automatically be configured and set for you, and you never have to go here and get them if you integrate application insights from using our Visual Studio Gallery extension. As you connect that particular project to application insights, you're either going to create a new app, in which case you'll get some of these new keys, or you'll connect it to an existing app if you've already done something with that app and you want to connect it to a data set here. Now, I also have the ability to sort of look at the configuration history for a particular app. And here you'll see all the different details around these tests. And if I did upload a test that had a custom extension or had a loop or did something that just wasn't possible to do on our particular locations, you'll see these things here. You'll see failures to upload these tests. You'll see a bunch of different things here, and eventually you'll see alerts created for those. Now, I also have all of the alert rules that have been created for particular apps also available here. And if I wanted to look at a different application in my view, I could choose a different app here, and I could configure these and look at some of these settings. Now, this particular alert came through that location test that we did, and we'll go create another alert and see how it appears here as well. Remember where I emailed Chuck. So this is our administration setting, and I'll just show you one other view or one other place. This is how you get to it, the little settings icon when you're logged into Application Insights. If you're logged into the Visual Studio team project or the home page, that will take you to the different admin settings. So make sure you're sort of within the Application Insights tab, and then that settings will take you there. So if I go to Diagnostics and look at metrics, these are all the different metrics that we've been collecting for this particular app. Now you'll see, if I look at Add Metrics, just above here, or sorry, edit metrics here, you'll see all the metrics that we're displaying, and you'll see the same metrics over here that we were just looking at in the availability view, the application availability and the application response time. These are metrics that are automatically shown in the availability view, but I could also add them here and see them from this view. Now what I can do as I'm looking at a metric is if I select this metric and say configure alert, here I have the ability to configure alert over really any metric. And I select this alert if I specify the average value and let's say last 15 minutes or the last hour, and I say that it's greater than, I don't know, if I get more than 100 greater than 100 request rate, I'm going to send an email to myself. And I'm just vladj@microsoft.com. And here again is that same copy to clipboard. So if you didn't want to create these rules through the portal, you could just grab that particular sample. I'll save this rule, and then we'll go back over here. If I go back over to settings, one thing I forgot to show you over here is this ability to upload configuration, where I could create one of these configuration files, and typically the way I would do this is by downloading the existing configuration. And in this configuration set, you will see the XML snippet for all of those rules over metrics, but you also see the entire web test that you've uploaded, or the single URL details. So if you download your current configuration set, you could very easily edit those different sections so that you could add rules over other metrics, and then you could upload it so that it includes everything and you won't overwrite what's existingly there. Clearly, there's opportunities to improve this and have even better integration with Visual Studio so that as you deploy an app, you can also upload this configuration file and you have these settings tuned into different environments and overridden in different environments. So let's go back and look at some of the other features on these dashboards before we break for questions. So Friday demo dashboard was ours. So every one of these different links are clickable. If I drill into performance, it takes me to the application server performance page. This is the page that we looked at yesterday. Right, configuration markers are here, deployment markers are here. This is where I can drill into my slowest request. Takes me to the events page. If I go back, I can drill directly to the events page. If I want to look at all my exception events, I can drill into a particular exception. This tile where I can open these up, understand what the exception was, drill back to code. If I go back to dashboards, and let's go into edit mode and see some of these things that just how easy it is to configure. There's a few different quick glance tiles where I want to show you the availability one, where I'm going to configure it for some of this test that we just created. So I think we associated them to Fabricam. No, hold on. Yeah, we created my new Friday test. So I'm going to choose this particular test, and now I'll see this test uploaded and kept up to date. I have the ability to make it a little bigger, where I'll look at different time frames. I think the data set's not just coming in for that one yet. Maybe we'll switch it to a different one, my first test. There we go. So this will show me if that particular test fails. So what we typically do is we have a few tests that are sort of end-to-end. What's our end-to-end view, which is great to know that something's down, and then a bunch of sort of stepwise tests that do different pieces to understand that, oh, you know what, our GSM flow is down, or you know what, no one can log in, or this particular page, 4 levels in on a particular application, the download config file isn't working. Those are the types of things that you can do in test. Let's look at some of these other quick ones. We've got this response stack distribution. That's a pretty cool tile that allows you to view some of the overall response time distribution for an app. Trying to find an app that has an interesting response time distribution. This one doesn't have it that interesting. Everything's sort of finishing less than 50 milliseconds. But this will show you that same thing as that stacked bar chart that we saw with the sort of percentile line on the performance page. Sort of real easy to just grab these, sort of drag them around different places, put different dividers, make all of these things really zippy. Now I can add any metric, so I can have a multi-metric tile or a single metric tile. I'll just grab a single metric tile. Where did it put it? There it is. Now any metric that we are collecting, if you customize the application insights config file to collect other performance counters, you'll see those in that list. So you can see what our default metrics are. Well, in this case, it's a Java app that I'm looking at, but if I look at the same app that we've been looking at, you can see some of the usage metrics are here, and some of the default metrics that are collected by this agent that runs on the server. I have a few options. I'll specify the title here, my key counter. Subtitle, I can specify some vertical axis. I can inherit the time from the overall dashboard, or I can specify a specific time. I'm just going to inherit time from a dashboard, so if someone changes the dashboard from last 24 hours to 48 hours, every little part on this dashboard will work. Let's just grab average response time and exception rate. Oh, sorry, I picked a single one. There, so we've got that, and we have a little summary here to show you what the average is over that particular period. So 8.69 milliseconds is the average period. So those are some of the capabilities in dashboards. I'll show you sort of just one. This is one sample dashboard that we have in our own in our own view, this is actually the availability of application insights today. It looks like it's a pretty good day. We may have had a couple tiny little blips, but all of our different flows or all of our different sort of features, application performance monitoring, our global service monitor, our availability feature set, and our usage feature set. It looks like log search still needs to be configured. But this is really what our team uses as a sort of its key dashboard to look at our availability, and it drives all of our live site processes. We very rigorously track sort of how the issue was found. And if it wasn't application insights, how do we improve it next time so that a customer doesn't have to email us or call us or tell us that we're not getting data. So that's the sort of view of dashboards and alerting and sort of getting started in application insights. Let's switch back to a few slides and we can wrap up and then go into questions. So we talked about alerting and dashboards. Here's a bunch of resources if you're just getting started at application insights. The V6 is definitely one that you want to grab. Really makes it easy to get started with application insights. Create a component, grab all those keys so you don't have to see them. There's a forum on the normal MSDN forums. We have an active user voice, ways to submit bugs, blogs, docs. And some of the last link is an entire demo environment. So if you're sort of here and build representing probably the rest of your team, it would be a great one to sort of try application insights. We've seen a lot of value if you try it on a perf environment or sort of a test environment where maybe you have been struggling trying to find what the bottlenecks are, what the longest transactions are, what the slowest ones are. Just try the agent on there. Try some of the insights and see what it finds and see if you can sort of have it solve some of those problems for you and sort of you earn your way into those production environments where maybe they are having a little bit more load and maybe you're using another set of tools or you're cobbling a bunch of your own tools together that you're investing. That's a great way to sort of a really easy way to get started with application insights. Now, we do have Jeremy. It's really so bright. Jeremy's in the back. He's from our usability team, and he's really looking for participants to give us feedback, on new things that we're building, sort of quick pulse studies and sort of really full usability studies. If you're interested, talk to Jeremy in the back. And lots of great stuff in Visual Studio Online from both the project side and the application insight side. Here's a list of the sessions that are sort of related to this particular account, and this would be a great time for questions. I'm just VladJ@Microsoft.com. We have a few minutes left, and we do have one Surface Service Arc Touch mouse to give away. I'll ask a question maybe in 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, so if I stand up a web API REST service or a WCF SOAP service,
yes,
can application insights be used to send the JSON or the SOAP to the web service?
Yeah,
for performance
or
availability testing?
Yeah, if it's sort of on the wire, sort of navigable URL, depending on what auth you need to get into it, if it's not just publicly available, you could capture those URLs, put them into the load test, or add them directly. Sometimes for components that are sort of more back-end, that don't have UI, where it'll show up in a browser, you can click through. Sometimes tools like Fiddler that could sort of grab these URLs, put them in so that they can be executed regularly is what we've done. And sometimes there is a bunch of munging you need to do and automatic GUIDs that you have to generate and a few different custom extensions that you need to sort of give you the parameters that pass into your particular URL, but definitely is possible.
Does it have visibility into system diagnostics and the ability to like capture the SOAP or the JSON that's coming in or being returned?
Is it from the server agent side?
Yeah.
So from the server agent side, we will definitely instrument all of the code that you have executing. So as these synthetic transactions are hitting your app, we will also see those as requests and responses, and if things are slow, if things are happening there, we will have all of that context available.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. One over there.
If you already have telemetry in your application, how do you avoid polluting all the telemetry with all of these tests?
Oh, great question. So you already have telemetry in your app. How do you avoid sort of polluting this data set? Now, in this case, these tests don't run the JavaScript. So we don't run the client-side JavaScript that sort of sends the data like Gomez or Keynote do today. And our usage sort of system actually looks at the user agent and actually throws those away so that it doesn't pollute your real data set. So we won't impact it that way. But it would impact, for example, your exception rate or your performance rate or your overall response times, because from your service perspective and the agent that's sitting on your service, we can't tell that this request is any different than all of the customer requests. So yeah, you'll see some baseline of requests that these tests are doing. And this is the only way we can get any load on our demo, some of our demo apps that there really aren't doing anything. So these tests are creating load, creating exceptions, creating performance events there.
Thank you.
Oh, back over here.
I couldn't quite tell from your demo, but are you able to get like live real-time statistics from the dashboard? And could you maybe talk a little bit more about the overhead that the agents had?
Yep. Yeah, great question. So right now the metrics from the the tests we talked about most of the session today was a 5-minute interval for tests. Now, a lot of that data gets aggregated across locations, so we wait for that time to come in so that we can give you a response time at the web test level. And then if you have multiple web tests, all of that gets aggregated so that we can calculate an overall availability. So there are sort of 15-minute rolling averages where you'll see sort of data trailing there, and then there are tests that come in every 15 minutes. Every 5 minutes at the test level. Then the data from the agent is coming in at a 1-minute interval, and depending on how many instances you have, those are aggregating across all the instances so that you're getting sort of your request rate and your memory and CPU across all the instances. Today we don't have a way to get to actual instance level data in the portal today. And then the overall overhead for the agent for doing the bytecode instrumentation and for working with the .NET Framework profiling APIs, it's in the sort of 1% to 2% range, sort of up to 5% is our goal. It sort of really varies depending on the app, but that's typically what we see right now. It's definitely not completely free. Question over?
What is the goal of the Visual Studio Online anymore? Because it seems to be all integrated into the next portal of Azure. So why should I still need to use Visual Studio Online?
Well, that's a fantastic question. So right now, if you don't need to use it right now, you don't need to. It's right now it is a preview feature. The whole portal is in preview, and we're obviously working hard to get it beyond preview. So it is a great preview right now, and it doesn't have all the features that are available in these other portals. Clearly, from a directional point of view and from sort of our investments, we will be ramping up that investment to that preview portal, and we will be sort of really transitioning all of our feature sets into that integrated experience. Right? That's our goal, that's our direction, that's our North Star. It's not if, it's just really when. So right now, I think it really comes down to the set of scenarios that you need to accomplish today. If you can accomplish them all in preview portal and realize that it's still in a preview mode, then there is no other need. But if there are other feature sets that you need today, then today you just don't have any other option than two. And I think you have seen Microsoft be able to recuperate your continued investments forward, and can't imagine that there won't be a way that even if you are using two now, it'll be seamless to use one later. Question over here?
Are all of these features available for any version of Visual Studio, or do you need a specific version?
Great question. So the web test creation does require Visual Studio Ultimate. The viewing of the web test result file, that does not require Visual Studio Ultimate from what I remember, but the creation of the web test does. And then I didn't show any of the IntelliTrace features or any of those that I showed yesterday. Those do also require Visual Studio Ultimate. But viewing them in the portal, like all of the scenarios where I was logged into Visual Studio Online, those didn't require any special version of Visual Studio installed. Question over there?
Is there any way to pipe in some of the metrics that you're gathering on your tests into like a SCOM backend or something like that, so you can have a more integrated view of everything that's going on?
You want to take the data from App Insights into your thing, or your data into App Insight? The first one, both.
Either way.
Both. Yeah, right now, neither is an option currently right now today. Both are important. Both we've heard about. Both we want to do. It's not something in the immediate near term. I think you'll probably see us focus a little bit more on the incoming for sort of just the ability to allow us to ingest really anything if it's associated to the app and you want to be able to see it in sort of the portal as you're looking at these counters. Right? We really wanted you to see get the entire picture of an app from this view. The other one is also important for alerting scenarios, for integration scenarios, for all sorts of things where you want to mine this data, you want to store it, you want to capture it and have it available offline. Right now, the Visual Studio web test integration, load test integration that Chuck showed, does have it downloaded as part of that Visual Studio web test file. So it's sealed, it has all that data available. Yeah, question over here?
Yeah, I would like to ask what are the criteria to mark the test execution as successful or not? Because we've seen the HTTP result code, we've seen the text comparisons, but how about, say, latency, for instance? If my latency is longer than 500 milliseconds, for instance, I may need to mark this as unsuccessful. So what are the criteria?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, right now, we don't have a good way of specifying what the response time is for a particular transaction to look at latency and use latency as a barrier for failure. That's a good one we should think about.
Is it possible to generate a public link of your dashboard to make it public available
for other customers? Got it. So right now, all dashboards are only available to people who are authenticated users that have access to that Visual Studio Online account. Yeah. That's right now the security model. There's no way to give someone a read-only access or some other data. That's the story today. We definitely think that exposing data through APIs could give you ways to put it on whatever portal you want. Mm-hmm. But today, unfortunately, they have to be a Visual Studio Online user. And once they are a Visual Studio Online user, they today can do anything they want in Application Insights. There's no role-based authorization or access in Application Insights today, as there is in team project side. Team projects, you can specify that Vlad is a user, but I can't add any other user. I can't create a team project. I can create bugs and only this team project. I can't even see those team projects. Today in App Insight, if you log in, you see all of App Insights. You can delete it. You can create it. You can reset keys. You are essentially the admin of that.
All right, thank you very much.
Just a quick one. Existing apps that are using, for example, Log4net and all that sort of stuff, is there any way that we can somehow tweak this so it can push more stuff into Application Insights?
Yes, great question. So we talked about logs a little bit yesterday. Let me show you one thing up here. So if I go to Diagnostics, sure, leave this page. I forgot to save the dashboard. If I go to Diagnostics and I go to Search, here's where we have the capability of working with these Log4net, nlog, or trace listeners. So if I choose Log4net and I want the data for this app, let's say this app Fabricam is using Log4net, I can click here. It'll show me where to get the NuGet package, how to initialize this log appender, what to add to my web config. And once I deploy it and execute it, as long as the MMA agent is there on that particular set of apps that are running this Fabricam app with that App Insight config file, all of my logs will now appear here and they'll be searchable. I showed what that search looked like a little bit in yesterday's session. And then, oh yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I showed you sort of the initial experience for a brand new account. If you come back and add another account later, we have sort of this wizard here where you can say, yes, it's a server component, it's Java, show me the instructions, here's these, or maybe I'm a .NET Framework app, I'm running in Azure, and I'm a cloud service, as long as it's not worker role. This is the steps that you apply to apply a cloud service. Let me go to another one. And maybe if it's a virtual machine, if it's not a server component and it's just a website, I can show it here. And this will essentially just give me the browser piece that I add. If I'm a Windows Phone 8 app and I choose this, I get to name my app, and it has a bunch of steps here to essentially add that to my app and deploy it and start seeing the data. Question there?
Yes, does Application Insight work on like a Linux or Unix box?
Yes. So right now, Application Insights, that Java app, or the Java scenario that I just showed for Tomcat and JBoss, will monitor your Java apps, whether they're running on Windows or Linux.
What about PHP?
Yeah, right now PHP isn't supported.
Okay.
Yeah, PHP, Node, Python, some of those are. Right now, it's just Java and .NET.
Okay.
No Ruby or any of those others. Yep.
Do you have any plans to share, excuse me, web tests run locally on-prem? Behind a firewall, effectively, you know,
and then you can share the resulting data? Absolutely. Yeah, I mentioned that. We think that'll be key to supporting those intranet scenarios, where those servers, you can do the performance monitoring, you could send the telemetry data from the browser, but you can't really do these availability scenarios in an integrated way. Definitely sort of, it gets talked about a lot in the backlog, but unfortunately it's not sort of in the next few sprints. Right now we're in a 3-week sprint cadence. Okay, I think we're almost over time. I think I am over time. So we'll do one quick question. Let's think about this. How many locations can you run tests from in Application Insight? Oh, all right, 16. Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. Love to hear about your feedback on App Insight.